Languages are a cool thing. They're how we communicate with each other and how we say our thoughts to other people. This is just a video going over most languages in the world and describing them now, briefly. English really is the bare bones language. There's a sentence structure, but honestly, anybody who doesn't major in English doesn't know what it is. People just kind of say stuff and it means stuff. Sometimes a sentence really isn't even formed. They just say words and we understand each other through it. This is probably because English is a mix of a Romance language and a Germanic language. It has roots in Germanic languages, which we'll get to later. There's a complicated language behind English, not getting into all of that now, but all you need to know is that in 1066, a conquest by the Normans caused English to develop its history with the Romance languages. You may also be wondering what else English is known for other than being the best language for anybody to learn as a second language. That kind of ties in with the next point, but it is the international airport language. Any airport you go to, I kid you not, English right there beside the language of whatever country you're in. English also has a bunch of different dialects as well. The dialects, the funniest part about trying to communicate with somebody and they don't know what you're talking about. Oh, what do you call these? Sneakers. Wrong. Oh sir, what about these? Fireflies. A little bit wrong, sir. Final one. What do you call this little thing? A bubbler. Wow, look at this little schmuck. Why? Looks like we have a lot of fixing to do. Tangent aside, let's talk about why English is a language and it's so bare bones. It's mainly due to the word structure of the language. Let's go down the list. No gender nouns, check. No formal, informal talk, or rarely ever, check. Having one word cancel everything, check. Not. A word that means the day before yesterday, check but never used. A word that means the day after tomorrow, same situation. The infamous eerie yesterday and overmorrow. Common words if your main concern was dying of the plague, but words people might see today as fake. These are definitely words, and do they have meaning? Kind of depends on how English literature teacher you are, but that is English in its entirety. What a language, huh? Moving on to Romance languages, there's a lot of these, but I'm just going to be focusing on Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian, but shout out to Occitan, Catalan, and Romanian. The main key points between Romance languages that you would need to know is that they are all derived from Latin, which makes them all very similar. Let's start off with Spanish, one of the most common languages spoken in the world. It's usually what people see when they think of Romance languages. It's spoken in over 14 countries, including most of South America and basically all of Central America. As a lot of differences from English, one of those being the fact that usually adjectives are seen after the subject of the sentence, while usually in English they are beforehand. Another thing that Spanish has that a lot of Romance languages have, where the plurals are consistent, we say deer when there are multiple deer, or mice when there are more than one mouse. In Spanish, they say plurals with an S at the end of the word. Portuguese and Spanish are 89% similar, which makes sense considering the borders of all the countries that speak these two languages. No matter what, they are always bordering in some way or another. Portuguese has a lot in common with Spanish, like the adjective rule and the plurality rule with its words. The difference comes with the pronunciation of the words and the vocabulary of the languages. It is really like the Scandinavian languages, where they're very similar, but in different ways than words. Portuguese vowels are also different in many ways. The vowels with accents on top of them are different. For example, E with no accent means and E with an accent means it is. The language also mainly has roots in Brazil now, mainly due to the population of Brazil being way higher than Portugal. Portugal still has its own dialect of Portuguese, but it is not as prevalent as Brazilian Portuguese. French is a complicated language, possibly the most complicated part of the Romance area. Mainly, this could be because of the French number system. Did you mean to say 90? Might have to say 40, 20, 10. Doesn't that add up to 70? Doesn't matter. But that's not too important. Roman numerals are probably the reason for that. But it's the hardest part of the language. Other than that, it follows the same rules that the other Romance languages follow. So other than the weird number system and a bunch of vowels in their words, it's pretty similar. Now we reach the language that relates everything together, mainly because it is the closest form of Latin we have today. Italian, 82% similar to Spanish, 80% similar to Portuguese, and 89% similar to French. It's a combination of all the words and structures found in those languages. Italian has words that are the same way pronounced in other Romance languages, like bye in Portuguese. In Italian, it is ciao, but in Portuguese, it's spelled differently. It also has the same word forms that French has, with its basic structures. One cool thing about Italian is that every word ends as a vowel. If it doesn't, it's a borrowed word from another language. Hotel is a common example because it is borrowed from French. And in Italian, you pronounce every letter of a word, which is different from languages like English. There are more languages in the Romance category, but I can't get to all of them now. The Greek language uses a different letter system that comes from the Phoenician alphabet. As the symbols we all know, such as alpha and beta, which are just the cool letters, the Greek alphabet is probably the coolest alphabet out there because of the names and the other things about it that are being good. Greek also has a similar structure to English in terms of sentences. It's just harder to learn because of the alphabet and the sounds. Fun fact about the word alphabet is that it comes from alpha and beta letters in the Greek alphabet. Germanic languages mainly just include German, Dutch, and Afrikaans. They're spoken in areas such as the German Switzerland area and some former German and Dutch colonies. They all have very similar sentence structure to English, which is where English gets a lot of its structures. This is also why Dutch is the closest language to English to learn. But let's start with German and see the important parts of the language. Oh, you put the second verb of the sentence at the end? Check. Half the time the people speak better English than you? Check. Rankings of the languages and their dialects? Check. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, and don't forget that they always sound like they're yelling at you. Check. Now on to Dutch. Dutch has 2 cases instead of 4 for its gendered nouns, but also is like German with how words work. They are pronounced differently, however, and also are like Romance languages in that sense. Dutch also uses the present tense for the present tense and the past tense, which is one noticeable difference between them and English. If you would talk about a vacation your friend went on, you would say, "My friend has gone on vacation last year." Now, a language that derives from Dutch is Afrikaans. Afrikaans has been seen as an easier language to learn for a native English speaker. This is because of the structure and less complex feature it has compared to languages like German, but was a very similar structure to English in terms of sentences. Afrikaans is mainly spoken in places such as South Africa and other southern African countries like Mozambique and Botswana. Now with Scandinavian languages. This one we can bang out pretty easily. The one key note is that they're all gonna come from Old Norse, which is developed in the Scandinavian region. This one is the one with the short words. This one's the one that uses og and is more aggressive and sounds like they're yelling at you. This one is the one that sounds nice and funny. This one is the one that's the hardest to learn in some eyes. This is the only one that's a tonal language for some reason. Yeah, so some pretty key differences, but all you need to know is that Icelandic and Finnish are Nordic languages, but are different from the others, so they're not easy to learn, as compared to the Scandinavian languages, which are closely related to English, and much easier to learn for native English speakers. There's 4 key Slavic languages. Those languages are all on the eastern side of Europe, probably due to the USSR's borders and how many people lived there during the Cold War. The main languages that will be discussed are Russian, Polish, Ukrainian, and Czech. Russian and Ukrainian use the Cyrillic alphabet, which is different from the Latin alphabet we use. Russian is the most popular Slavic language. This is largely in part because Russia has the largest population out of anywhere these languages are spoken. Some key differences other than the alphabet are the way you ask a question. You pitch your voice down instead of up at the end of that sentence. The other thing that is different is how you put emphasis on the vowels. It also has 18 cases, which means there is no the or a before a word. Ukrainian is very similar to Russian, where there's no articles before words, but some noticeable differences are the fact that you is used formally and informally. Other than that, they are very similar, probably due to the borders of the two countries being so close. The next languages use the Latin alphabet like English does. These languages are Polish and Czech. Polish is a very unique language. One thing you may know about Polish is that they have every consonant known to man and then some. In a lot of Polish words, you see at least 3 consonants next to each other, which rarely makes you think about how you even say that. Polish is also like the other Slavic languages, which means it's a synthetic language. A synthetic language is a language that changes what words mean based on where they are placed in the sentence and what the context is. Czech is very similar to Polish, but also has a few parts of English involved. In some of the big cities where they speak Czech, they slip a few words from other languages in, like they do in Germany. Czech also has a bunch of consonants like Polish, but also uses words like in or at different places. It's like a reverse cycle with English, how they are used. Now, there's a lot of languages with different alphabets than the Latin alphabet, so I'll just list the most popular ones that have a big population of people who speak it. That includes Arabic, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Hindi, and Japanese. To start off, there is Arabic, mainly spoken in the Middle East and throughout. It has the same thing about dialects that most languages have. Since there's a lot of countries that speak Arabic, it makes a big map of different places with different words and pronunciations of words. Yeah, sure is a lot. Really is, but that's how dialects work. Arabic also has its own alphabet system called Al-Abjadiyya. It has 28 letters, but they all make different sounds compared to the Latin alphabet. If you want to learn more about the Arabic alphabet, I would recommend looking up a graph for it. Arabic also has its own number system, which actually might look cooler than ours in terms of aesthetics, but not as cool as Roman numerals. It really does look cool, especially if you change your phone's clock to use these numbers, though it does take a while to get used to them. Next up, going eastward, is Hindi, since India and the countries that speak it are much western than the other countries. Hindi has its own alphabet different from Arabic and English, where it has 56 letters in it. The alphabet is called Devanagari. The alphabet has no capital letters in it. Another difference between English and Hindi is how you write the letters. English is written on the line of whatever you're writing, with it sometimes going below the line, like in P or Q. In Hindi, it's written differently, where it is all below the line. Otherwise, the language and other variants are spoken in India and surrounding areas. A very big population of people know the language over there. Next up, going east, is Chinese. Other than China being on one time zone for the entire country, and the country is massive, the language they speak is also one of the most difficult to learn. It has a writing system named Hanzi, where it gets a lot of its characters in vocalized symbols. The fun part about Chinese that a few other languages like Finnish do is that they are a tonal language. Different words can mean different things when said in a certain way. Pretty cool, but as an English speaker, toughest thing known to man. Chinese sounds can be seen as influenced by some other languages around the area, and vice versa for some cases. Next up is Vietnamese, which is one of the most common languages spoken in the world. It uses a very similar alphabet to that of English, but also some differences in terms of letters. Some letters are missing from the alphabet, but it still has 29 letters, which is more than English. They also use the ideas of formal and informal speech in the language depending on who you're talking about. It's very similar to Romance languages in that sense. Next up is the language of Korean. Korean is an interesting language just in the way the words are formed. Words and sounds are used by combining different sounds in 3 areas of a sound. The top left, the top right, and then the bottom all make up different tonal sounds, which when combined can make different words and sentences. The sounds in each side of the total sound can only be a certain number of letters in the Korean alphabet, which when learned is the easiest of the Eastern language alphabet. It has simple shapes as compared with other languages. The alphabet used is called Hangul and has 24 letters total, close to the amount used in English. Korean also has some borrowed words from English and other languages, since after World War II there was a lot of influence over the country, causing some words and other things to be adapted into the way of speaking. Korean is still one of the hardest languages to learn in the world for English speakers, but probably not as hard as the next one. Moving on to Japanese, a language known for its difficulty, classified as one of the hardest languages, but not as hard as Mandarin Chinese. It makes sense. Japanese has 3 different scripts it uses for the written form of its language. Those scripts are hiragana, katakana, and a new definition of pain. Kanji usually is used to represent different objects in writing, made to simplify the process of writing one symbol instead of a whole word. It doesn't have to be used, but usually is used for the sake of simplicity. A lot of sounds from Japanese are borrowed from the Chinese character system, due to Japan first being inhabited by people from China, and the language evolving from there, because they use the same writing system. Japanese is a good thing to learn if you want to do a challenge, but not ideal for anybody who just wanted to start off learning a language as a second language. But anybody can try. Now returning back to English, not because of any new information, but more as a bonus. There's so much more dialect differences between British English, American English, and Australian English. Flip-flops are called songs in Australia, and that is already something that shouldn't be there. That was most of the languages in the world, or some of them, a little brief history about some of them, some interesting facts and the bare bones of them, and some other things. Like, comment, and there's a subscribe button if you want to, and thanks for watching.